بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بخير بن, welcome everyone to another episode of the Kurdish and English series. It's going to be, literature again, Kurdish literature, and this time on the topic of essays or paragraphs, what we call پەخشان, لزمانی کوردی in the Kurdish language. So let's get started. It's not going to be long, just the starting bit, and hopefully we'll leave the rest for another video. So first, this on the right is only the questions that we gained from this. So focus on the left part of the screen for now. All right. پەخشانی کوردی. وشەی پەخشان لە فەرهەنگدا واتای پەخش دێت یان بڵاو. پەخشیان بڵاو. وەک زارەوەش وشەی پەخشان بۆ ئەو بەرهەمە دەبی و زانستیە بەکاردێت کە نەخراب نەقاڵبی کێش و زمانی شعرەوە. And in those 2 lines and a half, we established 2 things. First is the definition and the etymology. وشەی پەخشان لە فەرهەنگدا. Here it says وشەی پەخشان, the word پەخشان in the dictionary. This tells us that this pertains to etymology. واتای پەخش یان بڵاو هاتووە. پەخش یان بڵاو. پەخش یان بڵاو means like, wide or, just something فراوان, like just something that's common. And وەک زارەوەش, here says وەک زارەوە, meaning as a term, وشەی پەخشان بۆ ئەو بەرهەمە زانستی و ئەدەبی. And this is where it starts defining it. And so, in the first 2 lines, we established some things. وشەی پەخشان in farhang and in zarawa. Farhang means dictionary, zarawa means in a common term. We established that etymology, it's pəxş or blau. These are the 2 words you're going to have to memorize as definitions as on farhang. And وەک زارەوەش وشەی پەخشان, we're going to say بۆ ئەو بەرهەمە ئەدەبی و زانستیە بەکاردێت کە نەخراب نەقاڵبی کێش و زمانی شعرەوە. پەخشان is used for that writing بەرهەم that is either literary or زانستی بەکاردێت. That is either literary, ئەدەبی یان زانستی or scientific کە نەخراب نەقاڵبی کێش و زمانی شعرەوە, that has not been put under the umbrella of weight or the language of a poem. As we know, poems are comprised of weights. I forgot the actual word. I think it's just called weights, but we're going to call them weights. Here, we're going to get another thing. The first division of literature, based on how it shows itself or how it is, we have 2 types of adab, and الشعر وپەخشان. If we look at here, we have written down these questions so far. وشەی پەخشان لە فەرهەنگدا واتای چییە؟ پەخشیان بڵاو. پێناسەی پەخشان بکە, which is the definition, which is the second line. ئەدەب لە ڕووی ڕوخسارەوە چۆنە؟ لە ڕووی ڕوخسارەوە, based on how we divide it, like based on how it is or how it feels like, we're going to say پەخشان and شعر. پەخشان means essay or paragraph, شعر means poem. لكونوا, and this year we're going to devolve into something else, these final 3 lines. لكونوا الشعر وپەخشان هەبوو. Since a long time ago, we've had شعر and پەخشان. We've had poems and paragraphs. لزۆربەی ئەدەبی نەتەوەکان لەکۆندا پەخشان کەمتر و شعر زیاتر بووە. But since the beginning, پەخشان has always been less, paragraphs and those types of writings, and poems have always been more. پەخشان بە شعر زیاتر دەنووسرێت. لإستادا پەخشان لە شعر زیاتر, but nowadays paragraphs are written more than poems are. لێرەدا پرسیارێک دێتە پێشەوە, ئایا شعر کۆنترە یان پەخشان? This final line is very important and is really the bread and butter of this subject. It says, based on these, what we just discussed, a question arises. Here it says آیا. آیا means it's a question word. شعر کۆنترە یان پەخشان? Which one is older, poems or paragraphs? رأيكم, the first opinion. دەڵێت شعر لە پەخشان کۆنترە بەم بەڵگانە. This paragraph is going to discuss the 3 opinions that all agree that poems are older than پەخشان. And so these opinions are all important. You got to memorize them. شعر زمانی هەست و سۆزە و لە وجدانی شاعرەوە هەڵدەقوڵێت. کەچی پەخشان زمانی ژیریە و لە مێشکەوە پێ دەگات, جا لەبەر ئەوە مرۆڤ زووتر هەست و سۆزی جوڵا و وجدانی کەوتۆتە کار, اینجا گەشەی سندووە. Here it says that شعر or poems are the language of emotion and love and conscience. And they come out of the conscience of a human. But Pakhshan, or paragraphs and essays, are the language of smart or intellect. Smartness or intellect, and they come out of the mind. And so here some questions can pop up, like, where does poetry come out of? And you're going to say from the person's wijdan, or their conscience. But with Pakhshan, or essays, it's the language of intellect, so they come out of the brain. جا لبر أوي مروف زوتر هسوسوزي جولا, and because humans first had emotions and love before they had this type of intellect that could allow them to write paragraphs, they surely wrote poems first. And so this is what the first opinion hints at. And so we go to the second opinion. شاعر لبر كيشو سروا آوازكي 1 second. لبر ئاوازەکەی لەبەرکردنی ئاسانە و دەکرێت بە دەقی خۆی پارێزگاری بکرێت هەروە بێتە خوارێ کەچی پەخشان لەبەرکردنی سەخترە و ڕاگەنی دەقەکەی زەحمەترە. The second one is more in line with human nature of forgetfulness. It says that poems are just easier to remember and easier to memorize, so they are more appealing to people for remembering. But Pakhshan, or paragraphs, have tougher memorization and they're tougher to remember. That's the second opinion. The third opinion, and though this just goes into history, it says the oldest things we found have always been poetry, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Iliad by Homer, or the Odyssey by Homer. And this year it says, and dramas. So these are the oldest found pieces of literature, and they've always been poetry. And so this is the third opinion that is in line with poetry. And so now we're going to go on to the second major opinion and its reasons. ضرايدوام Dalit. Pakhshan Pir Sha'ir Hatwa Bambalgana. The second opinion agrees that paragraphs came before poetry. And so let's see what evidence it has to offer. The first piece of evidence is مرۆڤ یەکەم جار کە زمانی بژاوە و قسەی کردووە بە ئازادی هەست و بیری خۆی دەری بڕیوە. And so it says that humans in the beginning, when they started to develop language, or when humans developed language, and they started talking in language, they wanted in a free way to express their emotions and their ideas. Pashan, this non-highlighted part, Pashan halida au hasubirana bkhatana qalibi keshu sarwawa. Then afterwards, these people tried to put these ideas and their thinking and their emotions into a waznu qafi, or a keshu sarwa, meaning turn them into poetry, put them under a weight to put them in poetry. So this expresses the idea that paragraphs and essays aren't always written, even if you think or you say something that could also be considered paragraph or essay. And that's the first piece of evidence. And so from here on, we're going to go to the next part. Yep, this one. All right. And so that was the first piece of evidence. And so now we're going to go on to the third piece of evidence, which is, the second piece of evidence, which is page 96. It says, Lakono Pakhshani Sarwadar La Parizgakan de Nusrayo Kteba Asmanikan Zorbian Pakhshan Nusraun. Jigalawi Nusini Kurti Sar Dargao Diwari Kosh Kukhala Konakan Ukeli Gorakan Pakhshan Nusraun. Boya de Be Pakhshan Lashair Kontrbet. The second piece of evidence says that the oldest, and since old times, Pakhshan were Pakhshani Sarwadar. It doesn't call them poetry, but it calls them a weightful essay, or an essay that carries poetic weight. Nusraun, and also uses the religious books and the religious holy books as another piece of evidence. It says Lakono Pakhshan Lapasakan Nusrawa Ukteba Asmaniakan, the holy books. Most of them were written as Pakhshan, as poetry. As essays or paragraphs. And it also brings in the small pieces, or the small sentences written on the walls of castles or the doors of castles or even the headstones on graves have all been written as paragraphs. بۆیە دەبێت پەخشان لە شعر کۆنتر بێت. So certainly پەخشان has to be older than poetry. And that's the third opinion. کۆنترین بەرهەمی ئەدەبی کوردی دۆزراوەتەوە و and we haven't lost it. What is it? And so this here we're gonna get more questions. Like, we know that the oldest pieces of literature found have been poetry, even in Kurdish poetry. This question says continue barhami adabi Kurdi dozrato u naqutabi, meaning the oldest literary work that is in Kurdish and that hasn't been lost. What is it? And we know that's Baba Tahiri Hamadani, which was the oldest Kurdish poet. But after these opinions and which one came first, like, chicken and egg paragraphs, that's just like we're gonna go over to the main differences between them. And this says page 196, Jiawazi newan sharu pakhshan, the difference between shar and pakhshan. Again, the most important differences. شعر لوجدان السوز وهالدقلت بلان بخشان زادي هوش وجيريا. شعر لوجدان السوز وهالدقلت. هالدقلت means comes out of or sourced. And so this says poetry comes out of the conscience and the emotions of a human. So we relate it more to the heart. But paragraphs or essays are the product of hosh and jir. Hosh means thinking and jiri means intellect. And so this pertains more to the brain or the mind. The second point says, I haven't highlighted this, but it's fine. زمانو دربرين لشعر دا آويتيه كچي لپخشان دا شيكاريه. شعر بيوسي بچري دربرين وكرت بريه لكاتيك دا پخشان بيوسي بشيكرنو دريج داري وليك دانو هي. زمان لدربرين شعر دا آويتيه, meaning when you express yourself in sha'ir, it's called awiyata, or you're not trying to explain in depth. But pakhshan is shikari, meaning it's breaking down, it's explaining in depth. Sha'ir piyusi bachri darbarin u kurd barihe. Sha'ir wants to explain a lot, wants to not explain, but rather express a lot. Bachri darbarin means express, and shari means density. Has a lot of expressing density, and kurtbari. At the same time, you want it to be shorter. But at the same time, pakhshan, piyusi bashikirno, meaning breaking down and lengthening, drejdari, and liegdano here, meaning, explaining. And so, these are the three main things you need to memorize for pakhshan at a time when we're talking about jiawazi. Like, for example, in the exam, the teacher asks you, what is jiawazi akani pakhshan o shi'archin? You write these points down. And so the third point, we canceled it out because it's way too long way too long for something that doesn't need to be this 3 paragraphs long. We just say sha'ir kiesh sarway here, meaning it has rhyme and meter. I just remembered. Yeah, kiesh means rhyme and meter. And so not weight, but rhyme and meter. And pakhshan doesn't have rhyme and meter. Fourth, you can just ignore it. But fifth, naqshi dabash buni hadik lashar pakhshan lasar la parada jiaya. The way that they're expressed on a piece of paper is different. The topography of poetry on a piece of paper and pakhshan are different. In classic literature, in classic poetry, every single line is divided onto 2. This is something you're going to notice when you're reading classic Kurdish poetry, that one long line of poetry is actually 2 small lines of poetry. And the sarwa, or the final piece, which is the meter we call it, or the final piece, a final word, or how the line of poetry ends, can also change how this poem looks like. That is a poem. Now we're going to go to essay. Kachi. But pakhshan paragraphs, all of them are written together. It's all written together. And the only time it divides into a different paragraph is when you have finished what you're saying and you want to start onto something more, or your opponent is going to go on to something else. And that's really all there is to Pakhshan, this part of Pakhshan, and its relation to Shi'r. Next video, inshallah, we are going to go on to Jorakani Pakhshan, or the types of Pakhshan. I hope you benefited and study well for the exam so you can get good grades. Khwafis.